Welcome to the Juniper podcast, where we talk about the sometimes messy, emotional, and more nuanced aspects of being a dog parent. I'm your host, Allison, the founder of Juniper. You can find us at juniperpet.co to read more, download our free guides, and find the best emerging pet products. My co-host is Haley.Young, dog mom of Scout and writer for Juniper, and her own website, Pause and Reflect. You can find that at pause, P-A-W-S, and reflect.blog. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Juniper podcast. I'm Allison, the founder of Juniper, and I'm here with Haley, who's one of the writers for Juniper. But today we are going to talk about Haley's backstory a little bit. Even things that I've always wanted to know about you. Like, you just have a really cool life that I think a lot of people will be interested in and want to emulate and learn from. So let's get into it.
Yeah, I hope I don't disappoint. I feel significantly less cool than you seem to think I am, Allison.
No, you are very cool, and you're living literally like a dream life that a lot of people want to know about how to live. I guess a little bit of why I think your life is so interesting for those who don't know. Haley and her husband and their dog Scout are traveling full time, living out of a van life, which I know very little about other than like scrolling on Instagram and being like, oh, this looks so cool. So really love to know a little bit about like, how did you go from that would be a cool idea to actually executing on it and making this sort of like your next adventure? And then how does Scout fit into all of that?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's one that Sean and I sometimes still ask ourselves because the last few years just in many ways feel like such a blur. We started daydreaming about van life when we'd been dating for a little bit less than a year, I think. And we were both 21 and just like young, living in Madison, Wisconsin. It sounded like it could be a cool adventure, but I graduated a year early. He didn't even have his first full-time job yet. Like, we were definitely just throwing ideas out there. But then we kept getting more and more excited about it. And I really love feeling adventurous and like doing things that, make my heart feel full. But I'm such a homebody, and I definitely have struggled with confidence just in a whole bunch of areas throughout my life, especially with my space. I can be pretty particular about my space. This is something I've continued to work on, and I really take a lot of confidence from having all of my belongings with me. So even like in college, I would hate going to study at the library. Like, I couldn't study at the library. I had to study in my room with access to like my kitchen and my food and all of these things. So how that actually ties back into van life is that, I love going on adventures and I love travel and hiking and those sorts of things, but I'm not the most comfortable just like taking a week and going somewhere random with a single bag and doing that sort of thing.
Throwing it in a backpack and leaving everything behind. And yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I sort of got excited about this idea of being like an adventurous homebody. And the thing that the van does for us is enables us to go and see all of these cool things and have these experiences, but still fundamentally have home base with us. So in a weird way, it made my space less stable than ever because, like, I don't know where we're sleeping tonight. Like, I'm not sure where we're going to park and sleep. And so that sounds like it could be a little bit concerning. But because I have everything in this space that I need, I just feel comfortable with that other ambiguity. That's the reason for me that I love living in a van so much. It's actually not because I'm cool. It's because I'm a little bit of a wimp and I like need my crutch. The van is my crutch.
Well, I love that because I think a lot of people think like, oh, that would be cool to do, but I don't have XYZ personality trait and therefore I can't do it. I think we self-select out of a lot of like fun and interesting experiences in life because we just think that must be for somebody else, somebody who has a level of like bravery or adventure or whatever that, I don't have. So I love that you share like the parts that, were sort of like do you feel like they match with it and the parts that also didn't, and sort of how like you came to put that all together. So I imagine it's like a huge learning experience too, because if you don't know where you're going to sleep on any given night, it's like a built-in challenge, but also a built-in comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. You phrased it so perfectly. And my personality and Sean's personality definitely mesh really well. He's way more spontaneous than me. He, doesn't have any of my reservations about things. And so we balance each other out in a nice, comfortable way. And then Scout has some just like default skills, like ways that we got lucky that she's well suited to van life, things that we haven't had much control of ourselves over. So, for example, like she's the right size, like she's big enough to jump in and out of the van and big enough to jump onto the bed with a step stool and like big enough to hold her own on all of these adventures. But she's small enough that, like we couldn't do this if she was a Great Dane. She just wouldn't fit in the hallway. So that's a very nitty gritty, like practical consideration, but I think it's something worth talking about. So in some ways we just got, just plain lucky that she was suited to it in a couple of those natural ways. And then in other ways, she's been at the forefront from the very beginning of us thinking about moving into a van. It's another reason that van life really attracted me, because I love this dog so much and I love spending time with her. And she has some quirks. She's very sensitive and it's hard to leave her with someone who isn't us. I mean, it's actually like not that difficult. We've done it multiple times, but it's really hard for me because I worry.
Right.
And she does better when she's around us. Like she is very much a two-person dog. Like me and Sean, we are her family. We are the social interaction that she needs. And, she'll have acquaintances who aren't us, but like really the most satisfying thing in her life, I think, is just being with her immediate family. So van life was really attractive because we could go do all of these things that we've wanted to do. Like Sean is such an adventurer. He has this huge list of things that he wants to see and experience. And we didn't have to keep planning about like, well, how will we get a sitter for Scout and how much money will that cost? Because, as you well know, it can be crazy to board your dog or have someone come stay at your house and all of these considerations. So that was really lovely.
And you really have to trust them.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so you found a way to like have a dog at this time in your life when you're also having these adventures and travels, which I think is like really interesting. I wonder, how many people have thought about that? Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I would love a dog, but it's for later in life. Like I lived in New York City for so many years. And I was like, okay, I'll get a dog later when I have a yard and space. And so that's why I'm really fascinated with your story, because like you're proving that with the right behavior and training and structuring your day correctly, that you can, like, it's not all about space. Like I think so many people when we also talked about earlier, saying, well, I can't have a dog at this stage of my life because of XYZ. Like you've really found a creative answer to those questions, right? So like if people are saying, well, the reason I can't do it is because, I don't have a big enough space or my apartment isn't big enough or there's all these different questions, but like you're doing it in a van. Like that's smaller than most apartments we're talking about with a cattle dog mix, which I know our dogs are different. My dog runs, literally runs miles every day. But how do you deal with her energy and get her out? Is your day just sort of structured around that? Or how do you sort of make sure that she gets her fulfillment in when you're in such a small space?
A couple of key things coming to mind here. The first is that when I first adopted Scout, I lived in a 700 square foot apartment. The van is like a tenth that size. It's like 70 square feet. And then we lived in two more apartments after that before we finally moved into a house. And then we sold the house to move into the van. So I felt like we'd already had enough experiences where we had navigated small spaces, lived in different situations, and been successful, that gave me a lot of confidence to pursue the van thing, which was definitely more extreme, right? Like I don't think that I would have had the trust in her and in myself to jump to van life like immediately after that first apartment. The fact that we'd gone through those experiences helped a ton. Another just sort of like logistical thing is that Scout is definitely getting older. And I always want to be transparent about that, I've thought about her fulfillment very critically. I'd like to think from the beginning. But some of the very specific, like especially exercise related things, those considerations have gotten a little easier to make as she's aged and as she slows down. So like when I, hear you talk about Addie, and Addie is barely out of puppyhood, it makes total sense to me that, I would say that she seems higher energy than Scout. And part of that is because our best guess of Scout's age is like maybe 8, like maybe 7-ish.
So it's way more doable when, they're not bouncing off of the walls. So I think like, no, this is great to think about, because I think for people, the takeaways is like, if you're thinking about getting a dog and you're thinking about the size of your space, something you really want to consider is the age and energy level of your dog too, because that gives you a little bit more flexibility, right? Like this is one of the pluses to getting an older dog, or not even older, but just like not a puppy.
Yeah. And I really like that you're using the term flexibility, because I feel like that's exactly what it is. Like we've put in a ton of work to work on Scout's off switch. And we have a huge training foundation. I've had her for a little over 5 years now. But the fact that, she is slowing down a little bit as she gets older gives us more flexibility to not have to follow like a sort of strict routine or meet a strict threshold every single day. Like we've just gotten to be a bit more adaptable as time has gone on. But the other big thing that I always want to say when I'm talking to someone about having a dog in a van is that we don't spend the majority of our time in our van any more than a dog who lives anywhere spends the majority of the time, like in, just one or two rooms of their house. So when we think about fulfillment, we're still going on walks, we're still going to the beach, we're still going to sit at a coffee shop, doing all of these other things. So even though our van space is small, unless it's like, pouring rain or there's inclement weather and we're stuck inside for some reason, we try to spend a lot of time outside. Even, like just this morning, we woke up on a street, nothing glamorous, literally just street parking on the outskirts of a little town area, and got out of the van first thing and just like walked, scout around past the coffee shops and those sorts of things. So you can make it work basically anywhere. It just depends on all of the variables that come together to make that successful. So like the years of training to help her feel confident in new environments, because she used to just shut down. Like the walk we had this morning in the dark never would have happened 3 years ago. And it feels like such a simple thing.
No, but like seeing how far you've come,
Yeah.
like I think is so important for everybody listening too, because it's something that like you do all this training and then you just unlock these new levels of your dog. And then it's like, okay, anyway, and you don't really stop and reflect and say like, wait a second, we could have never done this many years ago.
Right.
So I think it's really great that you're like you're still recognizing that even this far into training and living with your dog is like, oh wow, look at us, like we're doing this now.
The van has made those things so obvious. Like we have so many moments now where it's not like I knew when I first adopted her that van life was the ultimate goal or anything, but just a lot of the skills that I valued for life in general have been particularly relevant living in the van. And so I'll just have these moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, all of that effort was so worth it, because now I can sit in a parking lot when it's 80 and I can open the van sliding door to get some airflow in here so that we're not overheating. And I don't have to worry about her jumping out of the van to chase the squirrel that's right there. Or, all of these things that felt like nice to train or like things that I should be working on. And now to really see them paying off in a way that kind of drastically improves everybody's collective quality of life. It's very satisfying. Van life's a good fit for all three of us, it turns out.
And it's a good reminder of like all this work you put in. Sometimes it can take so long to see it actually play out in your life with your dog. And so I've noticed that even just recently, a few little things have gotten better. I can't even imagine, by the way, opening a van door and having Addie not, and being able to fully trust that she will not chase a squirrel. Like that is still unbelievable, right? So, but like I am starting to see a few things get better to the point where I can imagine that. And so I think it's a good reminder for everybody too, that if you're working on this stuff and it feels like you're getting nowhere, maybe you want to switch up your training, of course, like look around at how you're doing it, but it might just actually be that it takes time. And I can't even believe how long some of this has taken. Like we're still working on recall. We're still working on this. We'll be working on that for a long time. But I'm seeing an improvement, but that took a year and a half, And so I can't even imagine, like how much more you can unlock the longer you're doing training. And it's also just a reminder that training is kind of forever and it goes on, but you can get to a place where things get better. So I think that's a really good reminder for people. We're going to take a really quick break and hear from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Ever wonder what you should be feeding your dog? I always say the best dog food is the one your dog will eat, that you can afford, and that your vet approves of. That's why we love Optimal here at Juniper. Their food meets European quality standards and is full of prebiotics, omegas, and superfoods that your dog will love. To save 20% with your Juniper discount, visit the link in our show notes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Talking to Haley about her dream life in the van. Maybe that's a little dramatic. I'm sure nobody feels like their life is a dream life. But the reason I say that is because what Haley's doing is living in a van with her family, doing full-time travel, which is, I think, a dream of a lot of people, and also working as a paid writer. And so something I want to ask you is sort of like, what do you think it is about you that's been able to make that work? Like, are there any muscles that people can work on building? Is it getting out of your comfort zone? Is it what is it that allowed you to, take such a big leap and step and really live this dream life in a way, right? Like, and I say, okay, maybe I should stop saying dream life. But what I mean by that is if you talk to people about retirement, what would you do if money was no object, right? Like people would come up with something like this, like, oh, I'd love to travel more and write professionally. And you're already doing this at your young age and everything. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about how you got to that.
Yeah. I think there are definitely some muscles that I've worked on building. But first things first, part of it isn't me. And I always want to be transparent about that. Part of it is that I came to the table through no work of my own, just with a ton of privilege that set the foundation that made this possible. And, even just like my partnership with Sean and having his support, I think that those things have been really, really key. But also, I am proud of myself and some things that I've really worked on and making this a priority. I think that one of the biggest things, it's a little bit abstract, but I come back to it all the time, is thinking about what I really value and what excites me and what fulfills me. Kind of like how I think about what fulfills Scout, to be honest. I can apply a very similar framework. And then really considering how I can create more of that in my life and what different sacrifices I might have to make or things that I might have to give up. So, like talking about dream life, like in the big, meaningful ways that make me thrilled to wake up every day and be alive, this life it's amazing. It's incredible. I saw dolphins out of my kitchen just like 3 hours ago where I was parked. I mean, that's incredible, right?
Wow.
But also, before I saw those dolphins, I had to empty a jug of my own pee into an appropriate dumping area, and I had to wake up on the street and all of those things. But those logistical considerations matter less to me personally than the benefits that I get. And I think that, that's a consideration that everyone can make in their own lives, and they'll arrive at different conclusions. Not everyone is going to say, oh yeah, living in a van is worth it. For me and Sean and Scout, living in a van is totally worth it. But it took a lot of conversations and thinking and journaling to kind of identify what those big things were, what are the priorities, and then to be able to commit to pursuing them, because it's uncomfortable. It's logistically uncomfortable sometimes to live in a van. It's uncomfortable to just make any big life change, right? When we shake things up, when we're concerned about other people's opinions, telling our family even that we were planning on moving into a van. That used to be a joke about what people did when their lives weren't going so well, right?
Right.
So getting comfortable with that discomfort, because we know that the discomfort is worth it for the things that we care most about. That gave me a lot of confidence that what I was pursuing was the right thing. And it made it a little bit easier to tolerate that discomfort, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. Basically, you're talking about choosing your problems. And this is something I like to say to people a lot is you can have almost anything you want. I'm not saying you can have anything you want. Obviously, we have barriers and all sorts of things, but I believe you can have almost anything you want. But you have to choose your problems. Which problems do you want? So I love that you identified that it's yes, I can have this outcome, but these are the problem, the trade-offs and everything, and the reality of what it's actually like to live like this and make a choice like this. And so I think it does take bravery anytime you're going off of any path, right? It's a path. The path is generally, it's oh, you're getting married, you're going to buy a house, and you're going to work a job and drive to the job and sit at the desk and all of that. And so you're definitely doing something very different than that. And you're choosing your problems, and it's your problems are dumping out your own pee. I love that. That's so honest and real about what it means. It's the flip side of, our last episode was dogs, dreams versus reality. And I just think it's so important that we all start talking about this, right? It's not everything you just see pictures of on Instagram is what it's like. And I think we all know this, but we still let ourselves fall into this a lot, which actually brings me to my next question, which is something super impressive about you is you've built a really large following online about your life, specifically with Scout, training, everything that you've been through, the travels, and just being a really thoughtful dog mom, which is how I found you. So I just love your writing and your blog. We'll link it in the show notes, of course, and we always have it linked. But the Pause and Reflect blog and, everything you've shared and been so open with, and then all of your writing for Juniper, that's teaching people, your takeaways about living life with your dog with Scout. But how did you build that following online? And Yeah, how did you get that going? I think that's another dream of a lot of people, that they're like, "Oh, and then I would have all these followers and be able to tell my story." And what do you think's worked well for you there?
That is such a good question. I have thought about this a lot. I go through phases of feeling really, really motivated in a social media context, and then feeling like, maybe it's not where I should be spending the bulk of my energy, and sort of oscillating. So this is still something that, like I have no perfect plan. I have no perfect answer. I think that very initially it started as an accident. And I think that that helped me because my original motivation for the Instagram was purely that I had just adopted this dog. I knew I was excited about training. I knew that I wanted to have a place to log that training and share thoughts about it. But I also knew that, like, my coworkers and the people who followed my personal social media probably did not sign up to receive 10 photos of Scout on their feed every day, right? So I was like, cool, I'll just make this dog dedicated Instagram, and then I can talk about it as much as I want, and anyone who follows it will opt in. And so then I don't have to feel guilty about smothering them with photos of my dog. I mean, I can't imagine why anyone wouldn't want to be smothered with photos of my dog. She's very cute,
No, of
but,
course.
and I think that that helped because it took a while. I think about like 2 years, maybe. Yeah, I think it was around 2 years when I started the website. And that's when I started taking things more seriously, like having the long form blog. And because it started kind of organically, it just helped me have some time to figure out what I was interested in talking about and make some real connections before I started overthinking too much about like algorithms and posting and things that I'm still terrible at, to be candid with you. So that definitely helped initially. And then focusing on the community, I think, was really important. Like, Scout was very fear reactive earlier in our journey, and it just dominated my entire life. Like, her struggles affected everything that I felt like I could or couldn't do, and how I felt about myself just as a person. And so I really leaned into that, and that was a little bit scary, but I think it helped me connect with people who were kind of in the same thing and in those deep emotions. And then that felt really good to be affirmed. Like our first podcast that we did for Juniper was "You're Not Crazy for Loving Your Dog So Much." I kind of had that experience by connecting with some of these fellow dog lovers online. And then that fortified me when I started to take it more seriously, in a sense of like trying to grow reach to stay centered on that original goal, I guess.
I still think one of like the greatest promises of social media and the internet is like finding your people and being validated and knowing that you're not alone in this feeling. And I think like obviously so many of the platforms have gone so off of that because of what they're, monetizing for. But I still think if you make that, especially if it's about something like fear reactivity in your dog, you are going to find those people. And I think it's something that like I definitely, when we started Juniper, wasn't really seeing anywhere other than in the depths of like conversations between people like you on Instagram and in other places where people would be really sharing like what is the day to day like with your dog if they didn't, come out perfectly trained and ready to go and so perfect, like which almost no dogs do, right? So I think like being validated, being able to meet other people who are going through it, and you feel so like it's not that you're not crazy for loving your dog, like, but it's also like you're not crazy for feeling big feelings about your dog or being even like kind of triggered by like how you look when you're out with them dealing with fear reactivity and all of that. So I just think it's like so important to make people feel seen in this way. It's something that's our goal with Juniper too. And I think that that's why like you've been such a perfect fit for writing a lot of this content as well, is like you have that depth of dog ownership experience. That's not just like, hey, you're frustrated because your dog isn't doing XYZ and there's a secret and the secret is XYZ. No, it's like the secret is it's going to be different for everybody. And we're going to need to talk about that and how we feel along the way. And so I still think there's a huge need for that. And like your content really gets at that too. So how are you thinking these days about, like you said, you started on social media, you were kind of just being authentic because you were like, I don't know how to, be, strategic or market to these people or whatever. I'm just really going to tell my story. And then that helped you grow so much because people were finding you who really felt connected and invested. How do you feel now about social? I know like you've taken some breaks. Like, how are those breaks? Like, have you learned anything from them? I think we're all feeling that these days is like, hey, should I get off of this thing? Should I cut back on this thing? So what have you learned from those breaks, or what are you thinking about social right now?
Right now, I still don't have Instagram downloaded on my phone. I'm only occasionally checking on my actual computer browser, and that's pushing me to be a little bit more intentional so that I'm not just like mindlessly grabbing it and thumbing through. I actually read a couple of books and was really, I'm trying to write a book about my journey with Scout, and that's been a dream of mine for so long, but it always falls by the wayside or feels like other things get in the way. And by the time I sit down to really work on it, I'm feeling drained. So at the end of January, I took a really critical look at different areas of my life where I was expending energy and tried to think about how I could structure things to really focus on that book goal, because I think that'll be meaningful for me as an individual and hopefully to connect more deeply with some potential readers as well. I'm not all the way off of social media. I don't plan on ever being all the way off social media. I value the community that I've been able to access and to kind of create a little bit so much. Like I cannot imagine giving that up. I do think that I want to approach it differently as time goes on. So it started off where I would just post like 7 training sessions of Scout in 2 days, right? Like just these unedited videos and no pressure. And it was just this public journal for me to look back on. And then I think I got kind of caught up in a while of trying to find this balance of this desperate urge to share and connect with dog owners who could understand me, but then also trying to make content that looked polished and that grew the audience, and like some concern with vanity metrics, which I'm not proud to admit, but I think probably most of us can relate to that. Like it's nice to see the follower number go up. It feels good. That's the whole point of why they structured it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking a lot about what I want my time in the social media space to look like moving forward once I sort of, re-download it to my phone and come back a little bit more full time. I think that taking space from it, and so much space, it's been like 6 weeks now, I think, since I first deleted all social media like off of my mobile device. And I think that that amount of space away from the daily rhythms and just sort of those mindless habits has really allowed me to see the parts of it that I value and the parts of it that I miss. Like there are people who I really miss talking to and keeping up with and seeing their stories and feeling so inspired from. But then also to isolate the things that I do not miss. I am way calmer. I feel way better not reading my comment section regularly, because, there's always someone who's going to misunderstand you online, whether accidentally or deliberately. I'm really sensitive to that sort of thing. So I'm starting to feel like I'm able to pull out more precisely, like these are the things that I love, and I want to optimize my time on Instagram to maximize these great things. And these are the things that are stressing me out and that I feel better without. And so how can I go about, minimizing those and making more room for the others? I don't have formalized answers yet, but the more time I spend, not spending 2 hours every day scrolling, the more confident I feel that I'm getting close to figuring out what that might look like in practice.
I also did a brief cleanse, I don't know what you want to call it, from social for a couple of weeks. It wasn't everything. I have to still check the Juniper Instagram and like do some stuff for work, right? You're always figuring out like work is so tied to this, like what's my balance
Yeah.
of this? But the Juniper Instagram is fun because all I'm being exposed to is a bunch of cute dogs in our feed and all of that. So it's actually like it's not that bad to look at that stuff. But yeah, I think I definitely have noticed that like pulling back a bit, even if it's even if you're looking at a lot of social, even taking a day off, like 1 day a week or something where you're not doing social at all, you really start to figure out what are like you said, what are the things I actually miss? And then, am I even learning anything new from those things? Or do I just kind of like seeing them every now and then? Like, am I actually trying that recipe? Or if we're talking about dogs, like, am I actually trying that training tip? Am I actually implementing this stuff? And so going back, even after I took a little break, I've kind of noticed like that I'm more aware of, wait a second, what did I just take? Like, what were my takeaways from that hour that I just spent scrolling? Like, am I going to do something differently with my dog? Am I going to cook something differently tonight? Like, am I actually motivated to go do something? Because I think one of the biggest traps is that it makes us feel like we did something when we didn't do anything. And so if you're following a bunch of dog accounts and learning about training or learning about behavioral tips, or sometimes you're just like, oh, I was just looking at cute stuff and I felt relaxed. And like, sure, if you actually felt relaxed, then maybe that is a plus. And so I think the hard part is like teasing out all of those different things, like where are the gains and then where, because the loss is always your time. You're always losing your time. Are you trading it for something valuable that actually, you do something in your life? And the trick is that like, figuring out what are those accounts? What are those ones that you're actually getting something out of? Can you go back and tailor your feed for that? But I think that's like, it's just like always refreshing when I see somebody else like even talking about this, going through it, especially with like the level of followers that you have and what you've built up. Like, I think it's super brave to like walk away and take a step back and say like, hey, if I'm ever going to write my book, like I need to grab my attention back and own it so that I can sit down and do this bigger thing. That's really cool. And like, I'm really excited for you. And I'm excited for the book. And like, it's going to happen. And we're going to be talking about it on the podcast when it happens. And so like, yeah, I'm super excited. But anything else you wanted to share about, I feel like there's a theme of bravery, doing your own thing. Like you don't have to be one particular way that you think you have to be in order to make a big change in your life. Like, what do you think, I guess, the biggest takeaway is for someone who's sitting there or like somebody who's listening to this podcast thinking like, wow, that's so cool. I wish I could do all of that. I wish I could be a paid writer who lives in a van or travels or any one of these things that we've talked about. What would your advice to them be?
That is such a good question. I wish I could tell my past self that I'm the one who has to wake up every day and look in the mirror and live the life that I've created. And of course, it's not just me creating my life. We talked about how many other variables are at play. I always think it's really important to acknowledge that because I never want somebody to feel like the reason they're not doing something is because they're a failure or there's something wrong with them. We all have different circumstances and sometimes things are really messy and we don't always get to choose our priorities in, a super flexible way. But I think that every day we do have the opportunity to make a range of decisions that can start moving our lives in a certain direction, even if that's just kind of what we were just talking about with social media or like, how we're directing our attention. For a long time, I was so preoccupied with what people thought of me and what I was supposed to do. And that's a very uncomfortable history for me to look back on. And for so many years, honestly, I was not trying to create a life that I love. I was trying to create a life that other people would look at and say like, hey, that Haley girl, like she's doing some things right. But they're not the ones who are waking up and living my life. I feel this with Scout. I'm the one who has to live with her day in and day out. And so I'm the one who gets to choose if it's okay if she begs for my food or these sorts of things. I have responsibilities to other people out in public spaces, of course. My rights end where other people's rights begin when we're sharing this world like we are. But there are so many decisions where fundamentally, like, the decision is for me. And that sounds so simple when I say it out loud now, but it took ages to get that through my head. It doesn't matter if someone thinks that living in a van is weird or if they hate it or they, can't imagine it, because it's been so great for me and Sean and Scout. And it doesn't matter if they're doing something with their life that I think would be a horrible fit for me because, we're the ones living our own lives. I think that was really powerful for me to finally recognize.
Yeah, I think it's like if you're focused on how things will look, you're not going to lead a happy or fulfilling life. If you're focused on how things feel, like how they really feel, this is where you're going to make the right decisions for you, right? And that's how we sort of like have, I think, build up that muscle a bit for making a decision that might not be the decision that everybody else is making or the decision that's, the common path, right? So like focusing on how does your life feel every day, not how does it look, and I actually think you can still be really ambitious and still have really big goals and live like that. Like, I don't think that means that now you're just doing something that's like la-di-da really nice. Like, I think you can do that and still build a big business. You can do that and still, sell your book and live your dream and like all this stuff. So I think actually you can probably do that more when you're focused on that because then you're really in your power. So I love this. I'm so inspired by you. I'm so, happy that we're connected and getting to do this podcast. And I think people are really going to learn a lot from having listened to you in this episode. So thank you so much for sharing everything with us.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait to interview you.
Ooh, okay, next time. That's all for today. To learn more about your dog and discover the best hand-picked pet products, visit Juniper at www.juniperpet.co.